Thank you, Keith. Thank you for the organizers, Princess Margaret and UHN. It's an honor to be here with you, to share with you the story of what we call global transformation, the global impact and the imperative that we see in front of our eyes every day to improve the care for patients worldwide. And you'll see in a minute what role innovation has to play within this very, very important imperative. So to start, really, I think I don't need to introduce or give too much explanation why we are seeing these barriers to excellent healthcare. But I can tell you a couple of things. One is that they're very, very common around the world. It's not just one country or a couple of countries that are facing those challenges. It's really everyone that's facing those challenges. It's amazing to see how similar the day-to-day challenges we're facing are similar across different countries and different institutions. So that's number one. And number two is really understanding that these threats, these barriers, are existential threats. These are not threats that we can just disregard or decide not to tackle because they're too complex, because it costs a lot of money. These are existential threats to healthcare around the world. And I'll show you, just taking one of those bullets that you see here and focusing a little bit just to show you why I mean it's existential threat. Let's look at financial sustainability. Every organization around the world is challenged with not enough resources. But if we look at the gap, and you see here in 2024, 2025, the gap between existing resources to the required resources for us to deliver excellent healthcare, that gap, which obviously exists today, and we all feel it, right? Nobody here who's working on production flows of healthcare is missing out on this gap. We see it every day. That gap is actually going to grow bigger with time. And this is a fact. That's what's going on over the last 100 years. That's what's going to go on in the next 100 years. In many ways, we're sitting on a train that's heading towards a brick wall. Now, we could argue, and if somebody wants, we could do that, whether or not we're going to hit that brick wall in 5 years from now, in 10 years from now, or in 15 years from now. But there's no arguing to the fact that there is a brick wall ahead of us and that we are on that train moving forward towards that brick wall. And unless we do something different, totally different than what we're doing today, we're going to get there. We're going to hit that brick wall. And before we get to that brick wall, we're going to start rationing healthcare because we won't have enough to provide everybody everything. We'll need to make decisions who gets an MRI and who doesn't, and it's going to become more and more and more problematic to provide the high level of care that we want to provide to our patients. So in one frightening thought, and I'll stop frightening you after this one, I promise, it's just the beginning. In one frightening thought, we might be, right now, in our age, at the top of what healthcare has to provide. We might be enjoying the best healthcare that anyone has enjoyed before today and after today. It could be that our children and our grandchildren will receive healthcare that's lesser in quality and accessibility to the healthcare we are receiving. And that's a frightening thought because we always think about healthcare as improving through the generations. We are receiving better healthcare than our children, than our parents, who received better healthcare than their parents, and we think this is going to go on forever, right? That's the notion we all think about when we think about the future. But it might be different. It might be that this is the top. And of course, we all want to have better healthcare to our children and our grandchildren, and that's why we need transformation. Transformation is all about doing things completely different. It's about moving away from those tracks that get us ahead towards this brick wall. That's why it's a huge imperative. That's why we cannot set it aside and say, let others deal with it. We'll jump on it when it's ready. We need to lead. So in 2019, we officially launched the ARC Global Innovation Platform. We worked for about 3 years to build it. I got the job in beginning of 2017. I was Chief Medical Officer at Chiba Medical Center. I was asked to also lead innovation. And we started thinking, what's the goal? What's the goal of innovation? Why are we innovating? It's actually a difficult question. If you ask yourself that, it'll take you a couple of seconds to think about the answer. And that's the process we went through early 2017 to finally realize that what we need is innovation to drive transformation. That thing that needs to happen for us to avoid the brick wall, innovation needs to drive it. Thinking differently about solutions is innovation. and transformation is about doing things completely different. So innovation needs to drive large-scale transformation globally. That's goal number one we've set to ourselves in 2017. The second goal was that as we're doing that, as we're transforming healthcare, we want to do something else that would keep this a very, very sustainable market. We want to make sure that innovation is an economic engine of growth. We turn healthcare into an engine of growth. Because today when we talk about healthcare, we ask ourselves, how much do we spend on healthcare? How much are we, what's our bottom line at the end of the year? How much did we lose this year? And the government needs to come in and top that up because we can't let institutions shut their doors, which happens in the US. We need to change that equation. Healthcare can no longer be only a cost. It also needs to generate. If it doesn't generate, again, we'll hit that brick wall, we'll run out of resources, we'll have to ration. We need to generate economic growth. And that is a completely transformational thinking about healthcare. So these are the two goals we've set to the ARC Global Innovation Platform. From my perspective, and Keith, you mentioned this, I come from, apart from being a clinician, my passion has been across the years on patient safety. And it always struck me that how come patients get hurt and patients come in with one condition and leave the hospital sometimes even in a worse situation. And we all know these cases. And that's all my passion for many years. In many ways, we need innovation to change the system so that we answer to these critical needs like patient safety, like quality, like equity, like financial sustainability, and others. So this is how we started this. We had to do one other thing to make sure that we have a chance of getting to these fantastic goals we've set to ourselves. And that was draft a common vision of the future of health. Because if you're trying to transform healthcare globally, the next question you're going to ask me is transform into what, right? We all are very happy about transformations and redesign, but redesign or transform into what is a valid question. And if we ask payers, they will have one answer, providers will have a second, politicians will have a third, patients will have a fourth, right? And industry, of course, will have their own answers. So how do we get one vision that we can all rally behind? We started in 2018 pulling together a think tank of leaders from very vast stakeholder groups. You see here providers, payers, industry, policymakers, academia, and patient advocates coming together around one table where everybody has a say, facilitated by an academic organization. We had an RFP, and Duke University submitted and won the RFP. They're conducting the research on top of what we call FOH. You see here a photo from our last, the one in 2023, get-together in Boston, where we were hosted by Beth Israel, who's one of the members of FOH. And you see the organizations here that are part of this, and it is a diverse group. By the way, Accreditation Canada is part of FOH, McGill is part of FOH, and some other institutions. But it's really, really broad. Globally, 13 different countries that are represented, and very, very, very diverse stakeholders. By the way, one of our partners is the New England Journal of Medicine. Why? Because everything that comes out of FOH gets published on the New England Journal of Medicine to get the biggest readership we can, to get the word out there. And you'll see a couple of publications that came out on the Catalyst over the last couple of years, and there are a total of 6. We also had others on health affairs and some other journals. But the idea is to create this blueprint, this common vision of the future of health, share it with everybody so that we all have a North Star to follow as we undergo these transformation efforts. So now that we have a vision, right, we're still left with one minor, small challenge of turning the vision into reality, right? You'll all agree it's a minor challenge. To do that, we've built ARC. So ARC is the transformation engine that takes the FOH vision, which again was built by many, many countries, many different stakeholders. It's not one entity that's building the vision, and turns that into reality globally. That's the task that we've taken. To make sure we're able to do this, ARC is based on 4 fundamental principles. The first one is focusing on digital health. I think that's why I'm here on this, in this morning specifically. Digital health is the main transformation vehicle. Much more than pharma, much more than medical devices. We have been dealing with pharma and medical devices for many years. We still are dealing with that. But if we're looking to transform, we need to leverage digital health. And we all agree, I think mostly after the pandemic, there's no need to convince anyone, especially not in this room, that within the next decade or 2 decades, what's going to have most of the impact on how we care for our patients is going to be digital health, apart from, of course, scientific discoveries and creating the evidence-based medicine and so on. And you'll see in a minute within digital health where we're focusing specifically. Number two is focusing on open and organic innovation. So the idea, again, innovation drives transformation, but to have enough innovation, you need to work on two fronts. Organic innovation, innovating from within our own organizations, because we have a huge potential to create game-changing solutions from within our own organizations, but couple that with open innovation. Some organizations really focus on organic and have nothing to do with open. Some are focusing on open, have nothing to do with organic. If we're going to see large-scale transformation happen, we have to work on both. I can tell you one thing, 99% of organizations around the world that I've encountered have almost zero capacity in open innovation. Open innovation means we have to scout for the right technology, find it, bring it on board, do a proof of concept to show that it works, a pilot. We're good at pilots, by the way. But then if it works, scale up. Now, that's a different story, right? How many times have we gone to conferences, we've seen a wonderful pilot, right, on stage with a great publication in one of the major journals in healthcare, but then there's one question in the audience, did you scale up? And that's where it's not so peachy, right? And if you think about it, it makes sense because pilots or proof of concepts are much easier. You need to find a clinical champion. You always will find a clinical champion, at least one, so that's enough to do a pilot, but then scaling up means change management, changing how we act. It doesn't just have to do with one clinical champion. We need everybody to act on it. Of course, it's much, much more challenging than running a pilot. So scaling up and implementation is a huge, huge barrier for transformation, and it's a cornerstone of ARC as well. I will do a deeper dive into organic innovation in a few slides. The third is international collaboration. We found that there's huge potential in working globally. There's actually added value created through collaboration when you work with partners across the world who think very much like you are thinking. We call this like-minded organizations. When we collaborate globally, we create much more added value than when we collaborate locally. And also, there's no tension of competition, right? There's always tension of competition when we try to collaborate locally. When you do this globally, we don't compete on the same patients. It takes away much of the tensions that exist. And so I start my days literally almost every day talking with our partners in Australia and New Zealand and Singapore. Because of the time difference, it has to be early morning. And I end my days talking with our partners on the west coast of the US. We still are looking for partners on the west coast of Canada. But I can definitely tell you, we have a few on the west coast of the US. So that ends my day. And to tell you the truth, if I have to speak in the middle of the day with somebody from Sheba, which can happen as well, it many times would be on Zoom. Because the campus is huge, it takes me 20 minutes to go across campus. Of course, Zoom is a perfect way to do it. So technology allows us to collaborate with everyone. It's finding the right partners across the world where we're not limited anymore by access or communication or any other problem. The only thing is time zone differences. That's the only thing we have to figure out. Other than that, we can really create a lot of value by doing this. Number four is the structured platform. Everything we've done at ARC since 2017 was written in what we call the cookbook. You see the cookbook here. Of course, it's not a real cookbook, but it was a way for us to visualize and say, listen, if we build the most successful innovation program at Sheba, but it remains at Sheba, we will never stand a chance of getting the global impact we're looking to create. But if we have these ARC models pop up around the world, each one driving transformation and economic growth through innovation, then we stand a very good chance of making it happen. And so we wrote everything down. With the mindset that at some point in time, we're going to need to give this cookbook to somebody else and say, here it is. Start working. And this is exactly what happened, and I'll come back to this point later on. Within digital health, of course, I think you're familiar with all of these buzzwords, of course, from precision medicine to extended reality, artificial intelligence, bioengineering, and remote care. This is where we're focused. This is where we need to create a lot of innovation to drive transformation. And if we had time, and I'm happy to follow up, we could go deeper into each one of the bullets that you see here to actually see what are the projects that are driving value, what's driving the transformation. And of course, I will touch on a couple as we go through this presentation later on. I have to say, of course, that the biggest effort that we have currently is, of course, AI. You're not surprised. the biggest buzzword today, of course, with Gen AI playing a critical role in how we see the future of healthcare play out. And we're now launching a pretty big AI innovation and implementation center at ARC, based on about 70 FTEs working only in the space of artificial intelligence. And we just hired the CEO of the center. She's starting the 1st of February. So much to look out for. And of course, there's been a lot of work that happened over the last couple of years, and we'll talk about that. Keith mentioned Spark. I want to say a few words. We found, and you'll see in a second what that resulted in, that when we talk about organic innovation, in many ways, we need to take clinicians and say, you need to be the center of innovation and transformation. Clinicians are working on the production floors of healthcare. They understand the pain points the best. They know what needs to change. It's not so much the researchers in the lab, which are extremely important, but not so much for transformation. If we're going to see transformation happen, it has to be on the production floors of healthcare. When we dealt with lean, there used to be a Japanese word called go to the gemba, which means where the action actually happens. And this is where we need to go, obviously. I'm sure you're not surprised. So we started working with clinicians to turn a clinician into a clinician, entrepreneur, and innovator all in one. So we formed this school, which works for 12 weeks at a time, on-the-job training, so the clinician doesn't need to stop clinical services. Nobody can afford 12 weeks off clinical services typically. On-the-job training, 4 hours a week for 12 weeks. We start with a problem, not a solution. The clinician doesn't need to come with this amazing idea that we all wish we had, but most of us, including me, don't have. We start with a problem, and we finish the 12 weeks standing on stage pitching our solution. And when we say this to the nurse at the beginning, she says, no way, I just can bring you the problem. I can't bring you the solution. But in a facilitated approach, during the 12 weeks, she comes up with an amazing solution. And I can tell you one that came out in one of the last Spark programs. We had a nurse, a hemato-oncology nurse, and we asked her, what's your number one problem? And she said, you know what? I hate taking blood from children, having to stab them every time to draw blood. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have like a peripheral vein where we could draw blood, not just provide medications, which is what we do with peripheral veins today. So she came up, a nurse, she's not an engineer. She worked with our engineers to come up with a solution which looks like a regular Venflon, a regular peripheral IV line, but is intended to draw blood rather than provide medications and fluids. And this has become a company, and the company, it's called VenoGuard, guarding veins. And the company now is an incubator. We'll see where that technology goes. Don't be surprised if you'll see VenoGuard in a year or two here, if you're working with children. This all came from a nurse who started with a problem. And I'm sure we all have problems, right? There's no shortage of problems or pain points. We could all have a big list if we really think about it and decide what makes more sense for us to tackle. So this is what Spark is doing. You see here a couple of faces just to give you a flavor that these are real people. This is the first cohort in 2019. Many of these people here already have technology that they created that is now in the market in a fairly short while. I won't have too much time to give you examples, but these are real people. When we started this, we made a decision we need to reach 5% of the clinicians. We said if we'll reach 5% of the clinicians that have gone through this training and have been changed, personally transformed from clinicians to clinical entrepreneurs and innovators, if we get to 5%, that will have a huge impact on the entire organization. We're now at 15% at Sheba. And with many of our centers around the world, we passed the 5% mark already, and we're seeing the impact that this has on the entire organization. It's not just about inventing new solutions, it's also about the mindset for transformation, for change, to being open to implement new things. And this is the culture change that's required for all of us if we're going to see this transformation succeed. So this is what we've been working with, and just to show you what we achieved, and I think the Spark program had a lot to do with it. These are the number of spin-off companies based on intellectual property that was basically discovered by clinicians at Sheba. 3 companies in 2017 when we started talking about ARC, and 20 in 2024. To give you a little bit of comparison, Mayo Clinic on a good year spins out 7 companies, Stanford on a good year spins out 5, and Cedars-Sinai on a good year spins out 2. I don't have the numbers for you, but just to give you a little bit of flavor. 20 companies a year is unparalleled. And it's not that we've been doing this for ages. We started with 3. So if we started with 3 and made it to 20 within this time frame, we think that we could do this with other institutions around the world, and that's why we're setting up these ARC centers, and we're starting to see the same numbers climbing up after the initiation of the ARC model. 2 things that are contributing to this. One is the entrepreneurship culture I already mentioned, and the second is streamlining commercialization, the whole process, because if you're going to launch 20 companies, it means that you need 20 CEOs, 20 people to run those companies. Where do you find 20 good CEOs every year? That's not easy. We're not going to let the clinicians run the companies. I hope I'm not offending anyone, but that usually doesn't work. The clinicians are much better staying in-house, continuing to treat patients, and coming up with the next amazing idea that we can turn into a company. They would receive their rewards down the road anyways, regardless. At Sheba, 35% of every dollar that comes back to Sheba from the patent goes to the inventor. And regardless if that inventor was active with the company or completely detached himself from the company, it's the same 35%. So what we're actually looking for you to do is think about the next great idea. And that's what the nurse who came up with Venogard, she's thinking about the next idea. She's not fully committed, and she's still a hemato-oncology nurse. So this is the model we've been pushing forward. You see the number of startups at the ARC network. We have 108 companies since 2017. Everything you see on the top part of the slide are companies that came out of Sheba based on our own IP. Some of them have technology now implemented in more than 1,000 hospitals around the world. You'll see an example soon. Everything you see on the bottom part of the slide are the best innovation coming from outside of Sheba and outside of ARC, who are coming into the network because we can provide them huge amount of value, including the big global market that ARC has. Then we have an accelerator program, and we have an investment fund. And altogether, it's 108 startup companies, but there's one common thing to all 108 companies. Each one of the solutions you see here on the slide gets us an inch closer towards the FOH vision. That's the North Star. When we see a technology in front of us, the first question I ask my team, does it take us closer towards FOH? And if the answer is yes, then we would ask the other questions. There are a lot of other questions. But this has to be number one. That's the North Star. This is where we start. And each one of those technologies gets us closer to that goal. We also work on the global ecosystem with leading industry. You see there on the right side of the slide, companies you're all very familiar with, pharma companies, med device companies, Microsoft and others. You'll see an example with what we've done with Microsoft in a couple of slides. We do a huge amount of joint development with those industry partners, and they play a critical part in what ARC is doing. But also, of course, the leading healthcare institutions around the world. And you'll recognize many of those logos. We have 31 healthcare systems with about 300 hospitals among the 31 healthcare systems in 13 different countries around the world, anywhere from, of course, a big focus on the US, but also a lot in Europe and Australia and New Zealand, Singapore, South Africa, South America, very, very broad in terms of geographical location. And we do huge amount of collaboration with the names that you see here, whether it's data sharing, which I'll talk about in a second, joint development efforts, joint implementation efforts. We learn what worked and what failed on the implementation. As we do this together, we have a joint steering committee when we implement AI solutions where we can actually learn from each other and share notes. And this has huge amount of value. We actually get together once a year, at least once a year, in what we call the ARC Summit. The last one has brought 1,500 people. It's a closed event only for ARC members and invitees, and 1,500 people attended the last conference. We actually have our first Asia-Pacific ARC Summit in March this year in Melbourne, bringing together mostly our Asian-Pacific partners from many of the countries we work in that part of the world. I mentioned data sharing, and this is where UHN is a very strong partner already. We started with Mayo Clinic. This was an idea in 2021. We had an MOU back then to build a common data platform that will be 100% in compliance with all regulations and will be completely language agnostic to serve as a model for the world on how we should share data. And you see, we started with 5 founding members, Sheba, Mayo, Albert Einstein, UHN, and Mercy Health. We've been working with the teams here, the data teams, on putting this together. We're looking at a launch date towards the end of this year. And then we started having others join, and we're looking to have 25 healthcare systems from around the world join by the end of this year. That's the goal we've set to ourselves. And this is, again, completely following regulations across all countries and language agnostic. So if you have Albert Einstein from São Paulo, of course, everything is in Portuguese on their medical records, but when we share the data on the platform, it's all in a common language. And we can learn so much when we look across cultures, across organizations, across countries. So this is where we're already collaborating, and we're very happy to do this. A little bit of numbers, but then I'll show you some examples after this slide of what we were able to accomplish in the 4 years from 2019 to the end of 2023. We're looking at the numbers now for 2024. You've seen the number of startups already, but I want to point you to the total valuation of the ARC companies. The growth we created in 4 years was $4.2 billion US. And we measured that number. It's not that Sheba is seeing 4.2 billion, right? But we measured that number because as we talk about economic growth, this is the growth that innovation was able to achieve. And this is why this model is so interesting to many countries around the world. And again, I'll show you later who's implementing this right now. So I really believe in this sentence. Without transformation, innovation will only lead to incremental change. And it goes back to the example of the pilots. Again, we're very good at pilots, but transformation is really what needs to happen. And because I hold both hats, I've been saying this quite a few, so maybe some of you heard me say this. I'm the Chief Innovation and Chief Transformation Officer at Sheba. The innovation hat is the fun part of my life. Innovation is fun, right? We all like innovation. Shiny objects, very cool people, nice coffee machines. That's what innovation looks like. Transformation is the painful part of my life. And again, you'll all appreciate that as well, because changing practices, especially in the healthcare world, where we're very, very much caught up in what was done in the last 100 years, resistant to change, is painful. But only working on both will get us where we need to be. So I want to show you some examples, and first start with the transformational roadmap that ARC has put together for organizations to really focus on, to try and reach what ARC is pushing for. What's the vision? Of course, best healthcare services we can provide. That's what we're all challenged with. That's all of our vision. But also the global impact. It's not enough for leading organizations to only think about what we do locally. And in many ways, that's what you do here in research. When you do research, it's about finding the next drug that will change the world, that will change the world for cancer patients everywhere, right? So you're also looking at that global impact. Global impact doesn't only mean a new drug. There's a lot of other ways to be able to achieve this. And this is what we set to ourselves. Then we have our mission, and I won't go through these, the outcomes and the sustainability, of course, and the caregiver and patient experience. I'm sure it's very similar to you as well. We have the strategy, which I'll touch on in a second, and we have the resources where we need to invest. And just we added, by the way, and this is important to note, we added AI as a resource. We had a huge amount of discussions. Where should AI fit on this model? And at first we thought, well, it's not really a strategy because it serves a purpose of pushing precision medicine and pushing decision-making processes and so on and so on. So where does AI fit? And then we realized AI today is a resource. It's a resource we need to tap into. In the Gen AI world, we tap into this resource almost every day, right? When we use ChatGPT for our own personal services, and I'm sure we all do this, it's a resource. How can we best utilize this resource to achieve these two vision that we set to ourselves? And so this is relatively new, the AI there. I'm still trying to get feedback, so if anybody wants to ask later, happy to open a conversation. And these are the high-impact transformational tools. This is where we need to focus if we're going to see transformation happen. From transforming decision-making process, we're not doing a great job with decision-making, and I'm not talking only clinical. It's also administrative, financial, patient flow. We need to improve decision-making. Redesigning professional disciplines. There's going to be a lot of redesign over the next couple of years. Care without an address, precision medicine, and patient empowerment. These are the high-impact transformation tools. Any investment in these five would create a high impact for the organization. And this is where we're focused on. A couple of examples. So we talked about decision-making processes. This is an example, it's the oldest one I'm going to share with you. It's from 2017, 2018, the first company that started at ARC, a company called AI-Doc. And ADoc is an AI algorithm to read CT scans. Now, you've heard about this, right? I mean, this is common today. In 2017, when we started, when we spoke with the radiologists, they said, we don't need decision support. We're fine, thank you. Of course, you know where this is coming from, but we said, okay, where do you need help? And they said, okay, well, in the emergency department, for example, when we have patients coming in all the time, and we do huge amounts of CTs, we never get to them in minutes. It takes us an hour or two to get to the CT scan, and then we can find that there's a life-threatening situation that we delay the diagnosis by an hour or two, which could be critical, like intracranial hemorrhage, pulmonary emboli, many life-threatening conditions that we recognize in the emergency department. So we said, okay, listen, the only thing the AI will do, it will prioritize for you what you need to read first, because if the AI will recognize a life-threatening situation, it will pop it up to the top of the list for you to read. And they said, oh, we're fine with that. That's perfect. We can't read all of them at once. So, they weren't threatened with that. We tested this technology, and we took it to many of our ARC partners, and you see here some of the results on reducing length of stay, turnaround time reduction, quality improvement, and much more. But without going into all these numbers, I want to share with you this last one, which is the clinical trial we did at Sheba Medical Center. We said if we can diagnose intracranial hemorrhage sooner, it should have an impact on survival, right? Because it's a life-threatening situation, and we know the faster we can react, the better the outcomes. So we did a clinical trial, and we found out that introducing this technology reduced mortality for intracranial hemorrhage patients by 30%. 30% reduction in mortality using a simple algorithm. It's just an algorithm. It's not a very, very sophisticated machinery. We calculated at Sheba that accumulates to saving about 60 patients a year, saving lives of 60 patients a year. But I think the next fact is the shocking one. This technology is now implemented in 1,500 hospitals around the world. Multiply the numbers of patient lives saved times 1,500, and you get the impact that an algorithm can make. And of course, I'm making it very easy. It's not about the algorithm. It's about the implementation, the transformation. The algorithm could be very accurate or less accurate. That's not the issue. How do you implement? How do you bring it into the workflows? How do you make sure that it doesn't create a threat and that clinicians actually use it? And this is an example, a perfect example of one of these cases. This is another invention, a recent one, where we were challenged with the fact we are not able to provide enough cardiac echo testing to our inpatient population. If you're admitted and you need a cardiac echo, you might need to wait a day or 2 days or 3 days sometimes before we can get you the cardiac echo, because there's an influx of patients coming on the outpatient to do cardiac echoes. There's a patient in the ICUs will always have priority. So if you're sitting in orthopedic surgery and you need a cardiac echo for a procedure, you might need to wait, which would delay the procedure. So we came up with an AI that allows any clinician, after 2 hours of training, to do a full cardiac echo. It's called ASAP. We worked for about a year to build it. We then tested it at Sheba for another year. We saw that it works beautifully. By the way, when we started, we said only doctors can do it because it's cardiac echo, right? So we started training residents, like point-of-care ultrasound. We then said, well, it doesn't really need to be doctors. It can also be nurses. So we trained nurses, and they were great at doing it, but doctors and nurses don't have enough time. You know who's doing cardiac echoes today at Sheba? I'm not sure what's his proper name, but the guy that does the ECG tests. And you know how complicated it is to do an ECG. So in the morning, when the guy comes in and has a list of patients he needs to do an ECG for, and there's the patient in room 2, 15, and 17, the next list goes on, who are the patients you need to do a cardiac echo to? Room 4, 8, and 12. So the same person, after 2 hours of training, is doing a cardiac echo. Now, it's not 100% like a cardiac echo. It won't replace the cardiac echo, but it gives us results immediately when we need them. And if the clinical suspicion is not high enough and the test we have done through ASAP is normal, we will discharge the patient without doing a full cardiac echo. Of course, if the clinical suspicion is high enough, we will wait for the cardiac echo. So this has led to a substantial improvement in care. And 8 months after the company launched, it received FDA approval for 12 indications. And if you think this is a solution for cardiac echo, this is just the beginning, because right now we're building this for DVT in the legs, for carotid plaques for patients after stroke or TIAs, abdominal aortic aneurysms, and whatnot. And if you've seen Star Trek ever, you know that there's this device that they take over the body and tells you exactly what this is. We're getting there. And the physical examination of the future would look like this. We won't need to put a stethoscope to the heart. We'll need to take a device over the body and get the results of everything much more accurate than physical examination, and then decide whether or not we need to do a follow-up test like an echo or anything else. Let's look at another example, digital pathology. We've completely changed how we do pathology. As you know, radiology was not digital, 20 years ago? Many here in this room, I remember those times when we used to hold the film up against the light, remember, to see the CTs and the X-rays. Today, that seems part of a museum, right? We see it in movies, maybe. Pathology, where we use microscopes, is a thing of the past. And I know you guys have gone through this transformation as well for digital pathology. But the next phase, once you're digital, is to build the AI solutions, like in radiology, like AI Doc that I've shown you before, but now in pathology, because if it's digital imaging, we can use AI to better read pathology. So we have created at ARC several solutions where we diagnose biomarkers, genetic mutations in cancer, based on the pathology slide. What that does is that within 2 minutes, we have the full spectrum of what we need to know, especially on several cancers like lung cancer, and we can start treatment. This has led, what you see here on the right part of the slides, to a whole different workflow, which is working right now. This is not something in trials. This is working right now, where we introduce AI on the digital slides and start treatment within minutes rather than weeks. We don't need to wait for the sequencing to come back. So this has a huge impact on, of course, survival, as we can treat earlier. And this is a path for the future on how we're going to diagnose these conditions. We've spun out 6 companies, I think, in this space with solutions, but really changing the processes and the workflows is something that only exists at Sheba Medical Center today, and we've been working with Mayo and Cedars-Sinai and several of our partners to introduce this there as well. And this is a latest announcement. We're working with Roche Diagnostics to enhance lung cancer diagnostic using AI, because right now there's about 12 different biomarkers for lung cancer that you can diagnose through digital slides, and we're getting towards a point where we won't really need to do any genetic sequencing. So this is another way we're going to transform healthcare. We spoke a lot about yesterday about care without an address, and Keith, you mentioned cancer treatment at home, which of course is where we're all aiming to go. We have a hybrid hospitalization model. We don't think it needs to be either in the hospital or at home. It needs to be in both locations when the time is right in the hospital, when the time is right at home. So that's why it's a hybrid model. And we can talk a lot about hospital departments that have both physical beds as well as virtual beds. If you run a department for oncology, you might have 20 physical beds, you know, the metal beds that we can touch, and then 20 virtual beds that you also manage. And you decide where the patient would be based on criteria that we're setting. So this is the hybrid model. We also look at hospital services that are extended beyond the hospital walls. If I need a consult, there's no issue why the consult can be virtual where the patient is at home, just like he's admitted to the hospital, and we take full responsibility over those patients. This is working at Sheba right now. Of course, we have digital solutions that allow us to bridge the geographical divide, and I'll show you a little bit an example in a second. We have currently more than 5,000 patients are enrolled in 15 programs of these hybrid hospitals at home, general medicine, high-risk pregnancy, psychiatry, surgery, and so on. It supports risk-sharing payment models because we take full responsibility over these patients, so we can pay bundled payments. We take responsibilities up to a year post-discharge on anything that happens to those patients. If they're readmitted, we will not be paid on readmissions for up to a year after discharge. And that's the level of confidence we have in these models. And also, from a humanitarian perspective, we opened a virtual hospital in Ukraine at the height of the war. We opened a virtual hospital, provided more than 3,000 patients services through telemedicine we actually sent our field hospital to Ukraine, deployed it there, and then set up the technology to see patients virtually in Ukraine, treated thousands of patients, and also in the Palestinian situation, of course. We're doing a lot of telemedicine to both the West Bank and Gaza. Especially, I'll show you a program with prenatal care that has been extremely successful in reducing mortality in the Palestinian territories. So, care without an address. This is where we see huge difference. What we didn't expect to see is this improvement in mortality. And you see the decrease in mortality in patients hospitalized at home compared to patients hospitalized at the hospital, the regular hospitalization. This reduction in mortality on the Kaplan-Meier curve you see on the right, we never expected to see. We thought about reducing length of stay. We thought about reducing readmissions, improving patient satisfaction. We never thought we were going to see such a reduction in mortality. We just published this lately on PLOS ONE, and you can follow the numbers there. We're doing randomized clinical trials now to show whether this would also be reproducible in randomized trials. And this is another program where you see how we use technology. High-risk pregnancy, hybrid care. We know women, high-risk pregnant women, sometimes at 18 weeks of pregnancy, you're deemed high risk, you need to go to the hospital, and you spend weeks, sometimes months in the hospital. Young women who might have children at home, who still need to work, right? Nobody wants to stop working at 18 weeks of pregnancy. We thought this is the right population to build our hybrid models. And so we have a whole program we built using technology that allows us to hospitalize high-risk pregnancy patients at home. We do fetal monitoring at home with technology. We do ultrasound at home. And by the way, the ultrasound is being done by the woman herself. If that's not patient empowerment, I don't know what is, right? To do your own ultrasound. And on the screen, while you do the ultrasound, there's a technician that guides you on what you need to do. So nobody physically comes to the home. It's being done remotely. We do urine testing at home. We need to follow protein levels. You need to follow glucose levels in high-risk pregnancy. We do that at home. There's no need even to send the urine for examination. The kit is digital at home. So all of this allows us, and of course the app, to collect all this data. All this allowed us to really take this to the next level and get higher and higher risk patients to stay at home. We have an AI algorithm that determines the risk, and as long as the patient is under the risk we decided is the right risk, they would stay at home. As when the risk goes up, they would come back to the hospital. If the risk goes down again, they go back home, because this can go on for weeks, right? So for weeks, we would follow up the patient in this hybrid fashion, and of course, the patients love it at home as much as possible. I think I'll skip this just for the interest of time, and I want to show you this example, which is, I think, the most cutting edge. I mentioned the collaboration with Microsoft. This is a Gen AI product that's intended to diagnose and triage mental disease. Anything from depression, PTSD, anxiety, anything that requires immediate attention, we want to know about it as soon as possible. So with Microsoft and KPMG, we created an avatar, Gen AI, which can talk, looks completely human. You can actually choose what language you want to have this conversation in, which is very handy. You can choose what the avatar looks like. You might feel more comfortable speaking with a man or a woman. It's your own choice. And then you have a conversation which will take 20 to 30 minutes, at the end of which time the AI would know if you have a psychiatric condition and what is the severity. And if the severity is high enough, you would get a call on the same day, setting an appointment for tomorrow with the psychiatrist. If it's low enough, that's okay to wait a few weeks to see the person. And this is critical, of course, in psychiatric conditions, because we know many of them could be critical, and we are not doing a good job today at providing access to these patients. Let's take a few seconds just to listen to what it sounds like.
Hello, I'm Liv, your digital wellness ally. What brings you to us today?
Hello, Liv. I'm John. I've been having nightmares again and I can't sleep. It's all coming back. Stuff I thought I'd move past.
Hello, John. I'm here to help. Nightmares can be really distressing, especially when they bring up past experiences you thought you had moved beyond. Can you tell me more about when these nightmares started happening again?
We'll stop here, but you get the sense. I've tried it many times. After 2 minutes, you forget it's not human. Okay, you have a full conversation. We've done a lot of trials to measure of course, the accuracy of the program. We found it to be 94% accurate in diagnosing the psychiatric condition and 85% accurate in diagnosing the severity. And it actually got a higher empathy score than the human psychiatrist. I don't think it says much about psychiatrists. I think it says much about humans at large, something for us to look out for and the role that AI will play in the future. So really to summarize, these are the 4 areas we're focused on. And just to show you what we're doing with the ARC cookbook, we've implemented ARC in these locations already, including Ottawa General Hospital. They were the first one. I always give credit to Canada for being the first. And that was already set up in 2019. Then after the pandemic, we established an ARC at Northwestern in Chicago and Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, a children's hospital, then also in Bahrain, and the latest one, December 5th, just a month ago, in the city of Nantes in France, in a cancer hospital, ICO, second largest cancer hospital in France. They have an fully operational ARC at this point. And we're now in the process of developing one in Melbourne, at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, largest hospital in Europe, Charité in Berlin, Ghent in Belgium, and in London, where I'm actually flying to after Toronto, where we're building an ARC that would serve 17 hospitals in London. A major project, a central resource that would work with 17 hospitals in London. Of course, London is all NHS, so it makes it a little bit easier with the trusts there to do this. Finally, the dream of every chief transformation officer is to build a hospital from scratch. Because when we try to transform where we currently work, there's always a lot of issues. It's already built. So we can't start from scratch. It's like building a house. When you build a house from scratch, you can really live your dreams, right? When you have to work with something that already exists, there are limitations. So we're now working on the hospital of the future, which will open its gates in 2031. And I could tell you that this would be very different than anything you've ever seen. This would be a completely different hospital. Nothing would seem like a hospital with this hospital as we open it. A lot to look out for. We're working with many of our partners around the world who are building new hospitals today to think about that and make sure we're not copy-pasting the hospitals of the past like we've been doing so far, but really, really think about this in a very different way. So with that, I'll end. Thank you very much, and we'll take a few questions. Thank you.
Okay, so we have Slido up. You all have the QR codes at your table, or you can take an image of the screen. If you have any questions, feel free to put them up there. If there's a question that's already been asked that you're really interested in the answer in, feel free to upvote it, and we'll try and get to as many as we can. We got about 15 minutes for questions, so I think it'll be a really good conversation. First of all, thank you very much. That was fantastic. I'm sure a lot of people in the audience, the hamster wheel is turning in terms of what problems they have, what can we solve, and also what's going into that hospital of the future. And so if you can share any sneak peeks of that, that would be really great. The first question that we have is, how do you convince clinicians to use a newly developed system before implementing it? What statistics do you need to show to convince them, considering that this system may create additional work for them?
It's a great question and a great challenge. When it adds added work, it won't work. So if you're handed a technology here and it creates more work, don't feel bad if you're not adopting it right away. We need to find ways to introduce this without creating more work, because where we're going to a huge shortage of clinicians, nurses, doctors, other health professions, as we all know. Again, similar across the world, not just in the US, Canada, and maybe places you're familiar with. It's the same everywhere. There will not be enough doctors and nurses in the future, and this is a critical issue. So if any new technology is creating more work, it has to provide huge amount of value for us to actually use it. So the way we're trying to tackle this, especially with AI, is to make sure we reduce the workload, not add to the workload. And there are ways to do this. I mentioned, for example, the ADOC or even the cardiac echo, which reduces a lot of work downstream, where you have to take a whole team to do these kind of tests. So definitely a challenge, but you need to find ways to reduce the load. Just to also complement, we start with clinical champions, and we always find clinical champions. They are eager to try something new. They create the initial evidence. If it's a new technology and you don't have evidence to show for it, you start with a clinical champion, that pilot I refer to, but then how do you, when it works, how do you scale up? This is where you're going to need to share the results of the pilot with the larger audience so that they can accept it and say, well, this would help my patients.
How much do clicks matter?
So clicks matter just like any other added work that we would consider, right? And any new innovation needs to reduce clicks. We're looking at the next generation of electronic medical records. It's not epic, but the next generation of electronic medical records would reduce clicks completely. And you know, I don't think it's science fiction anymore to say that we will have no keyboard and no mouse in 10 years from now. You know, and some would see it earlier even.
Great. What do you see as the major local barriers to transformation? Hospitals are notoriously slow adopters. We still use fax machines. How do current regulations and professional societies help with that?
So it's another great question. Again, I think what we need to do is we need to, it's a leadership mindset. The leadership on all levels, whether it's on the province level, on the healthcare system level, on the hospital level, on the association level, the leadership has to embrace transformation, has to embrace change, and promote that, and really celebrate the changes and the improvements that we're making. It's not everywhere. You won't see it everywhere. There's, like anything else in life, there's always early adapters. There's a new phone that comes out. You always see the ones that would be the first one to get it. That's fine. And that will remain. It will never be across the board everywhere. But every organization needs to make that decision. Are we laggards or are we the trailblazers? And we're looking at ARC for the trailblazers. We're looking for those organizations that say, we want to write the textbook of the future of health. We're not just, it's not enough for us just to learn from the textbook like doctors are used to be doing. We want to write the textbook. And we're looking for those organizations. And they would lead, they would create the evidence, they would show that it's possible, and the others would follow later.
So I'm assuming your new hospital of the future doesn't have a fax machine. So is there a top thing about this new hospital that makes it more conducive to keeping up with innovation than current hospitals? And what is that to you?
Well, the ARC model by itself, the open and organic innovation, that's what needs to be introduced. Building your capacity for open innovation is something we have to invest in. Building your capacity for entrepreneurship and organic innovation. Tapping into clinicians for innovation is the missing link in many, many ways. When you go around the world, and Princess Margaret is a very, very famous research hospital, academic hospital. You're doing a huge amount of clinical research and basic research. A lot of hospitals are focusing on the researchers, are focusing on anything from the bench to the bench to bedside, the famous bench to bedside that we're all trying to promote. But we're missing on a huge opportunity, which are the clinicians themselves. Once we tap into that resource, once we tap into the majority that are dealing with healthcare on the ground, on what I call production floors, this opens up a huge amount of possibilities for innovation that would drive real transformation because it answers to the actual pain points. Like that nurse who had to come up with a solution for drawing blood from children. This is what's going to change healthcare many, many ways. And I don't have to tell you what an invention like this could mean for children who are now traumatized because we run after them to try and draw blood.
So I agree people are critical to this piece, but often innovation is like a separate space that we build outside of the organization. Can you maybe talk about what do we need to incorporate on the production floor to enable that? So people are critical. What else do we need from like an infrastructure perspective to get that moving?
So the infrastructure needs to be central. You won't have infrastructure in every floor, every department. It needs to be central, but the idea is that you work with the clinicians that have been trained, like the Spark program that I've mentioned, and we support them. Because the first question I get asked many places in the world is, do you give protected time to clinicians for innovation? And we don't. And then people say, well, it won't work. Without, we're all very, very busy. We run around, we don't have time to eat, let alone innovate. So the way to do this is to have them come up with the idea, the need first, facilitate the solution, and then have a whole team, a central team, that supports them so that we can meet with them for an hour a week to get their response on what we're creating. They don't need to build it. I've been around the world and I've seen a clinician who started a company, was very happy about it, and I said, how did you do it? He said, well, I worked nights and I didn't go to sleep, and after night shifts I was staying around and working on my invention because there was nobody else to support me. Well, if that's your system, you're not going to see a lot of innovation happen. But if you have the support team to actually take that idea, take it off the hands of the clinician, have the clinician continue to provide his feedback, but continue to support patient care, is really the way to take this to what we have done with from 2 to 3 companies a year to 20, and all these solutions that could really change how we do healthcare and help patients around the world.
So like a SWAT team almost that works directly with all the
Right.
different groups.
And they're central. They're central within ARC. That's what they do. And as we build the capacity, it doesn't start on day one. When we started, that team were 3 people. Today, that team is 20 people. You build it with time as the capacity grows.
Can you talk a bit about the phenotype of that team? Like, is there a specific skill set or mix, or like what's the sweet sauce that you need there to help support the clinician?
It's a mix, right? I mean, we always have a clinician, somebody that was a clinician that has that flavor, that knows the clinical world, could be a nurse or a doctor. But there's business management, and there are, patent specialists. We always start by drafting what we call an invention disclosure form that basically just writes very simple how we see this. That's the beginning. At first, when we said to clinicians, oh, that's a great idea, why don't you download the form from our internet and fill it out and send it to us? Nobody got it. Nobody sent it, And when we called, they said, we didn't get it. Oh, I didn't have time. I'll get it next week, which of course they never get to, and I can't say anything wrong with that. But then we said, okay, don't worry. We'll sit down with you, and we send a person to sit down with them, and within 15 minutes, we write the form for them. And that makes it very easy, and we get it done tomorrow. So the number of forms that were filled tripled and quadrupled very, very soon. We started working on the ones that we deemed as the highest potential, and that led to more patents, and that led to the companies that you see later, and that leads to the innovations that will change healthcare.
So it's almost a concierge service, right, from the idea all the way to bringing it in.
Right, offloading from the clinician, because again, we don't have enough clinicians. We're not going to give each one 50% protected time for innovation. It won't work. They need to support patient care, first of all, but we need to be able to support their ideas when they come up.
Great. So kind of along the same vein, for your spin-off companies, do you always start with a clinical trial before commercialization? And if not, how do you know when commercialization, how do you know when to commercialize an unproven solution? So how do you validate them?
Well, first of all, these are all great questions. You're doing a real deep dive. I mean, I'll give you that credit. So we try to support those companies internally as much as we can. We would not spin them out as an independent company unless we have to, and have to means one of 2 things can happen. One is they need much more money than we have to offer, which obviously happens every time at some point. Or 2, they have a product that's ready for the market, which also happens. Sometimes we spin them out already with a product ready for the market. So we support them internally, sometimes a year, 2, 3 years, like that ASAP company with the cardiac echo I mentioned. We built it internally for about 2 years before we launched it. So by the time it was launched, it was already, the technology was spread across Sheba and several of our partners in the US already. That's why it received the FDA approval 8 months after the spin-off. Nobody has an FDA approval 8 months after the company forms. It typically takes years, but this was a much more mature company with a lot of evidence already created. And that's why when they spin out, they raise money, substantial money at that point, because the risk is much lower for investors at this point because there's already a technology that's working. There was already an investment of sometimes $1 million already internally that took place. And so investors are much more likely to come in at that point because they see the potential for that company.
And do you do it in the, like, as part of a clinical trial, or is it part of more of an implementation approach?
Yeah, I mean, it would go through all the phases, right? And it would start with a small pilot to show proof of concept, and then it would grow. If you take Live, which is our mental health avatar, we started with the first clinical trial was actually actors. We trained to be psychiatric patients. And we built vignettes. So we had a psychiatrist write vignettes of patients. We trained the actors. These are professional actors. And then every actor actually saw Live and saw a trained psychiatrist. And we compared, you know, who was more accurate because we knew the diagnosis, who was more accurate and who was more empathic and so on. Now we're doing another level of clinical trials to actually use this in the field and measure the impact that this has. So of course we follow the stages of clinical trials, just like you do with drugs and pharma. And of course, there's multiple publications that happen. Sheba Medical Center is the sixth most published medical institution in the world in terms of impact factor of publications. So it's very much in our nature to publish everything that happens. And so there's multiple publications that come out on each one of those discoveries.
Great. Okay, the next question is from Ali, so I have no doubt this one's going to be spicy. Innovation to transformation seems in conflict with the economic growth goal. Innovation has to accept failure, loss, otherwise not truly innovation. How do you reconcile these or convey the risk-adverse, diversifying mindset?
Good question, but again, it goes back to how we choose to focus on what to promote, right? And like I mentioned, the question, does it promote a future of health? Does it take us closer towards that vision, for example? Does the solution have an impact both on the patient care as well as financially? It could be by reducing cost. So once you answer those questions, you align yourself with the two goals. We would not push something forward if it doesn't align with the two goals. Those companies that succeed because they have a solution that would be embraced by the market contribute to that growth. We create jobs. 20 companies a year create quite a bit of jobs. If you look at all 108 companies at ARC, these are thousands and thousands of jobs that were created through ARC. That has a positive impact on economy locally. Well, that brings in foreign investments. Large industry partners, I mentioned Microsoft, they would come in and open R&D centers in your area, and that contributes, again, to the society and community around us by creating even more jobs and bringing in investment. And at the end of the day, the government, of course, takes their share by taxing, right? And that's perfectly fine because those taxes need to pay welfare and healthcare and education and so on. So this is how we start with a hospital, but suddenly it's an economic engine of growth. And it has an impact on the entire society. We're actually building right now a new building. I don't have that slide here, but we're building a new building for ARC on the Sheba campus. 22 floors high, 1 million square feet of innovation space. Why is it so big? Because we realized that once we have the ARC logo on the building would fill itself up. And I never thought I'm going to be a real estate person. But apparently, innovation and transformation also impacts real estate. And it pulls in the industry. They want to be a part of this. And they're going to come into this new building and work with us to create the next generation of healthcare.
Can you speak a bit about your risk tolerance? So you're going to have projects that align with your goals, but they still might not see the full maturity. How do you balance that? And what is your organizational, or what's ARC's risk tolerance for, taking things on?
We have to take risk. I mean, this is something that is a culture thing. We've seen it around the world. There's some cultures that are less risk takers and others that are more. You have to take risk and you have to promote failures as well. Sometimes when we interview a person to be a CEO of one of our companies, and he comes into the room and he says, listen, I just shut down my previous company, didn't work. Perfect guy to run a company, perfect guy. He knows why he failed. He has learned a lot of lessons. He's not going to repeat some of those failures. And the same goes with innovation. When something fails, get back at it and try it again. And those people that have that expertise of failing bring a lot to the table. So it's a very cultural thing. You need to take the risks. You need to, of course, promote risk-taking. And in some places that we're working around the world, that's not very common. And if you fail, you leave the system sometimes. That's not what you need to really create a large-scale transformation.
Great. Okay, last question before the break. Where do you see the role of the public before they become patients in the future of defining healthcare?
Well, first of all, we're all consumers of healthcare, right? I mean, even if we're not sick, we're consumers of health. We're consumers of wellness. Right now, everybody is involved with either caring for a medical problem, or making sure that we minimize the risk. And so we all have a say to this. I think the future of health, as we talk a lot about this on our FOH community, the future of health, the most major change that's going to happen is what's going to happen with our consumers. Our consumers are becoming real consumers. It has a huge impact on everything that happens in healthcare. It also demands for us to change. That's what they're expecting us. They're not fine with us not getting it right. They're not fine with getting hurt, getting a hospital-acquired infection when they come in for an elective surgery. They're not fine with that. And they're not fine realizing that they're at risk for something that we haven't told them about it, and we don't know that they're at risk because we don't know enough about risk predictions. So this is where they are going to impact the healthcare industry, and this is why we have to match what they are expecting from us. So it goes hand in hand with the transformation and innovation and what ARC is all about. And we have patients play a major role within setting the vision of FOH and working with us to design many of the solutions.
Great. Well, I could probably sit here and chat with you for another hour easily. This has been so enlightening. Thank you so much. Let's give another round of applause. That's great. We have a break right now, so 15-minute break, and then we'll be back, I believe, at 10:30. Thank you so much.
Thank you.